ඒ කියන්නේ ලයිෆ් බොයි අවස්ථා 10කදී ලෙඩ රෝග 10කට හේතු වන වෛරස් ඇතුළු විෂ බීජවලට එරෙහිව සටන් කරනවා කියලා.
Impartial and transparent. Sri Lanka assures independent investigation after police shooting leaves one dead amid protests. Police curfew in Ramukkana area still in effect. Tensions flare in Parliament as Parliament debates Ramukkana shooting. Head of Catholic Church says government should listen to the people's voice.
We want the government to understand that the way they are going is wrong. They should change their ways and listen to the voice of our people.
Bailout talks. Any deal with Sri Lanka requires adequate assurances that the country's debt are on a sustainable path. The International Monetary Fund insists. World Bank says ready to provide emergency support to Sri Lanka. Monsoon deadline. 2 vessels carrying 120,000 metric tons of coal unloading after Sri Lanka settles $38 million payment. All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9, this Wednesday, the 20th of April, 2022.
රෝස සුවඳ තවත් දෙකෝ කලක් රැඳෙන්න ඩබල් පර්ෆියුම් ලුක් සමගින් එන best ever sunlight rose.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
And a warm welcome. Joining you tonight on AdaDerana English News, I'm Indivari Amuatha. The protest at Ramukkana yesterday, which led to the death of one protester following a police shooting that also left 13 protesters and 20 police personnel injured, drew international condemnation. The US envoy in Sri Lanka, the British High Commissioner and the resident coordinator for the UN in Sri Lanka condemned the acts of violence exerted by both parties but called for independent, impartial and transparent inquiry into the events of the incident. Meanwhile, the head of state Gotabaya Rajapaksa and Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, while stating that people have the right to peaceful dissent, assured of a strict, impartial investigation.
A tense situation erupted in the area of Ramukkana yesterday after the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation announced a decision to increase fuel prices. People were agitating on the main railway line in Ramukkana for over 15 hours against the latest price hike amid a fuel shortage. The Railways Department said that 8 scheduled trains were delayed due to the protest. The police then fired tear gas in order to disperse the protesters. Soon after, the protesters were seen pelting stones at the police on duty. The police then opened fire at the protesters, leaving 10 of them injured. 20 police officers were injured in the clashes.
Stop that! Please stop that! Please stop that! कार्यक्रम लगनी थी लदी हुआ मैं काटे पुलिस स्टेशन दिया रखा Hey, Gahan. Hey, Gahan. Ay,
බෞසිරිය ගිනි ගැනීම වැළැක්වීම සඳහා ආරක්ෂාවට යොදවා සිටි පොලිස් නිලධාරීන් වටකර පහර දීමට උත්සාහ කිරීම හේතුවෙන් එම නිලධාරියන්ගේ ජීවිත සහ බෞසර රථයේ ගිනි ගැනීමෙන් සිදුවන විශාල හානිය වළක්වා ගැනීම සඳහා අවස්ථාවට උචිත පරිදි අවම බලය පාවිච්චි කිරීමට සිදු වුණා. ඒ අනුව මුල් අවස්ථාවේදී අහසට වෙඩි තැබීම මගින් කලහකාරී පිරිස පාලනය කිරීමට උත්සාහ කළද ඔවුන් පාලනය නොවූ බැවින් දනහිසෙන් පහළට වෙඩි තැබීමට නියෝග කරමින් පිරිස විසවා හැරීම සඳහා ඔවුන් කටයුතු කර තිබෙනවා.
The wounded were immediately admitted to the Kegal Teaching Hospital. Its director, Dr. Mihiri Priyangani, confirmed that one of the wounded succumbed to his injuries upon admission, while 3 others in critical condition were being treated. The others had sustained minor injuries. Later last night, the police announced a police curfew for Rabukkana area until further notice. In the meantime, an investigation has been launched in order to ascertain if the police exceeded minimum force when dealing with the protesters. Police spokesperson Senior DIG Ajit Rohana told media today that the police have also submitted a report to the Kegal magistrate to probe the death of the 42-year-old man yesterday.
A special police team has been appointed by Senior DIG Sabaragamuwa Province on the instruction of Inspector General of Police in order to conduct investigation. In addition to that, police has submitted a report to the Magistrate Court Kegol in terms of the provisions of the Section 22 of the Criminal Procedure Code in order to conduct an inquest in respect of the dead body in terms of the provisions of Chapter 30 of the Criminal Procedure Code. According to the police officers who participated in the operation, they used reasonable force according to the law in terms of the provisions of sections 89 to 99 of the Penal Code. In addition to that, section 107 of the Criminal Procedure Code, section 56 of Police Ordinance, and in addition to that, in terms of the provisions of the Chapter 8 of the Criminal Procedure Code. We are conducting further investigations, and the investigations are conducted in transparent manner.
In light of yesterday's incident, taking to Twitter, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa said that the Sri Lankan citizens' right to peacefully protest won't be hindered, adding that Sri Lanka police will carry out an impartial and transparent inquiry into the incident and Rabukkana, which led to the tragedy. The head of state went on to urge all citizens to refrain from violence as they protest. Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa too tweeted to express his distress following the tragedy and said that he has every confidence that a strict, impartial investigation will be carried out by the Sri Lanka police, who have always served Sri Lanka with utmost honour. The Premier urged protesters to engage in their civic right with equal respect and honour. Meanwhile, the US envoy in Sri Lanka, Julie Chung, took to Twitter on the incident, condemning any violence, whether against protesters or police, and called for restraint and calm from both sides. Chung stated that a full, transparent investigation is essential and the people's right to peaceful protest must be upheld. The Rabukkana incident also drew the attention of resident coordinator of the United Nations in Sri Lanka, Hannah Singer Hamdi, who expressed concern over the incident, saying that restricting the use of force to the minimum extent necessary is vital to protect citizens and their right to exercise fundamental freedoms. The British High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, Sarah Houlton, meanwhile tweeted that she condemns violence in all forms and called for restraint, saying the right to peaceful protest must be protected. Houlton added that an independent and transparent investigation is necessary.
In Parliament today, the main topic of debate was the police shooting in Rabukkana in the Kegal district yesterday that left a 42-year-old resident of the area dead, several other protesters injured. Minister of Public Security Prasanna Ranatunga told the House that all necessary measures have been taken to conduct an independent probe into the incident. Following heated arguments between the opposition and the government, the Speaker of Parliament, meanwhile, adjourned the session for 10 minutes.
පොලිසිය මේ අවස්ථාවේදී කටයුතු කළේ පොලිස් ආඥා පනත හා පොලිස් නියෝගවලට අනුවයි. පොලිස් ආඥා පනතේ 56 වගන්ති අනුවත් දණ්ඩ නීති සංග්‍රහය අනුවත් පොලිසියට මේ සඳහා අවශ්‍ය බලය තියෙනවා. මේ වෙඩි තැබීම සිදුවන්නේ
කරුණාකරලා ඉඳ ගන්න.
පාලනය කරන්න පුළුවන් හැමදේම කරලා මේ සිද්ධිය විමර්ශනය කිරීම සඳහා අවිස්සාවෙල්ලේ ජේෂ්ඨ පොලිස් අධිකාරිවරයාගේ ප්‍රධානත්වයෙන් විශේෂ පරීක්ෂණ කණ්ඩායමක් දැන්ටපත් පත් කරලා තියෙනවා. ඒ වගේම රම්මුක්කනදී පොලිසිය කටයුතු කර ඇති ආකාරය පිළිබඳව සොයා බැලීම සඳහා රාජ්‍ය අමාත්‍යාංශයේ ලේකම්වරයෙකුගේ ප්‍රධානත්වයෙන් විශේෂ කමිටුවක් පත් කළා. මෙම කමිටු වාර්තාව අපි කටිනේ පාර්ලිමේන්තුවට ඉදිරිපත් කරන්න බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා. ඊට අමතරව මේ සිද්ධිය පිළිබඳව ස්වාධීන හා අපක්ෂපාතී පරීක්ෂණයක් පවත්වන ලෙස ශ්‍රී ලංකා මානව හිමිකම් කොමිසමෙන් අපි ඉල්ලීමක් කරලා තියෙනවා.
මං අහන්න කැමති වෙඩි තියෙන එකවම බලයද? මිනි මරණ එකවම බලයද? ඇයි බවුසර් එක ගෙනාපු වෙලාවේ පරණ මිලට මේ ටික අලවිලු කරේ? ඇයි පැය ගණනාවක් බවුසරේ නතරගෙන තියාගෙන හිටියේ? මිල වෙනස් වෙනකන් වැඩි මිලට මේ රටේ පාරිභෝගික ජනතාවට තෙල් ටික විකුණන්න.
ගරු කතානායකතුමනි WP LX 2735 කියන බවුසර් එක ඊයේ දවසේ උදේ 8:20ට තමයි මුතුරාජවැල පර්යන්තයෙන් පිටත් වෙන්නේ. ඒ නිසා කිසිම විදියකින් මේක තෙල් මිල අඩු වෙලාවේ පටවගෙන ගිහිල්ලා හංගගෙන තිබිච්ච එකක් නෙවෙයි. 11:20ට තමයි රමුක්කන්ට ළඟා වෙන්නේ. 11:20ට තමයි රමුක්කනදී ජනතාව පාර අවහිර කරලා මේක කටයුතු කරන්නේ.
තිබ්බ සාමාන්‍ය උද්ඝෝෂණය වෙනස් කරන්න කණ්ඩායමක් කටයුතු කරා.
නේද ඔබතුමාගේම පොලිස් නිලධාරීන්ලා ත්‍රිවිල් එකක් ගිනි තියුවයි කියලා. ඒක පොලිසිය විසින්ම කෙරුවයි කියලා ඒක වීඩියෝ පටයක් තියෙනවා.
ස්වාධීන පරීක්ෂණයක් කරලා ඒක බලන්න. මෙතන අපි මේ ඇවිල්ලිච්ච ගින්නට පිදුරු දාන්න හදන්න එපා. ගරු කබිරත්තුමා කිව්වා වගේ පොලිසිය ගිනි තිබ්බා කියලා තියෙන වීඩියෝ පටයකුත් තියෙනවා. ඒ වගේම තමයි අනිත් පැත්තෙන් ටයර් වල හුලං අරින බවුසරේට පහර දෙන වීඩියෝ පටක් තියෙනවා. මේ තියෙන සියලුම වීඩියෝ පට ඇනලයිස් කරන්න ඕනේ.
The head of Sri Lanka's Catholic Church, His Eminence Malcolm Cardinal Ranjit II, condemned the Rabukkana shooting. Speaking to media, Archbishop Malcolm Cardinal Ranjit appealed to all those in governance to ensure such incidents are not repeated, but also called on those who protest to not let their emotions get in the way, allowing unscrupulous groups to instigate violence.
The people who have got down to the streets are affected by this terrible economic disaster that has hit our country due to mismanagement by the government. So it is the right of these people to protest, and we should respect that as it is given, as it is allowed according to the provisions of the Constitution. That right to protest must be protected. Otherwise, incidents of this type will happen continuously, and we must avoid that. It is a country which is religious minded and which has principles. Therefore, we do not accept that as a means of controlling the people. Therefore, we like to also appeal to all the governing people to ensure that such incidents do not happen again. We also like to call upon the people who protest not to let their emotions get the better of them, and also not to let unscrupulous parties to set them up one against the other, because these plots may be also part of the way that the authorities seek to control us. The best way to protest is to show our displeasure in a democratic and a clear manner. We see that happening in the Golface Green, where the youngsters are protesting with very serious nature and dignity. At the same time, please be aware that there may be some unscrupulous groups trying to set up one against the other and cause violence, so that the very purpose for which you are demonstrating may be defeated. I like to say that we are with you. We know that the people are suffering terribly due to this economic crisis, and we want the government to understand that the way they are going is wrong. They should change their ways, and they should listen to the voice of our people and ensure that democracy functions in the proper way, and that their request for a change be implemented as it was given to us in the message that was written and published by the Trinikayika Mahanayakas. That voice should be heard, and what they have asked for an interim administration for this country, not changing the pillow for the headache, but doing a thorough change should be effected in our country for the betterment of our people.
Now, the protest launch at the Golface Green was carried out for a 12th consecutive day today. The protesters continue to call the government to resign and the president to step down.
The protest at the Golfers Green continues to be carried out, come rain or shine, by various factions of society as they continued calls for the incumbent government and the president to step down. The protesters gathered at the Golfers Green also expressed their dissatisfaction with the government following the death of a protester at Rabukkana yesterday. The protesters who were gathered at the Golfers Green also observed 2 minutes of silence in memory of the 42-year-old man who died in the Rabukkana shooting. Taking part in the protest at the Golfers Green last night was winner of the Olivier Award for Best Actor, Derana English.
Now, more security for fuel stations. Details after this break. Welcome back. Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Wijesekara said the Sri Lanka Air Force will provide security to trains transporting fuel, while the Sri Lanka Army will provide security to fuel bowsers if and when necessary. Now, the minister had earlier assured safety for fuel bowsers and fuel trains, while also requesting the public to cooperate in the island-wide supply of fuel. This measure was announced today following the unrest that prevailed in the country yesterday after Supetco announced a revision to fuel prices. Meanwhile, Kanchana Wijesekara added that $38 million has been settled as payment for 2 shipments of 120,000 metric tons of coal. Thereby, the unloading of coal consignment is currently underway. In addition, unloading of a jet fuel cargo and a diesel cargo consignment is also in progress. Minister Wijesekara, stating that the safety of fuel bowsers and trains will be assured, urged the general public to cooperate in the supply of fuel across the island. The International Monetary Fund has said discussions with Sri Lanka on a potential IMF loan program are at an early stage, and any deal would require adequate assurances that the country's debts can be put on a sustainable path. He added that the specific design of a Sri Lanka IMF loan, including program targets and conditionality, would be agreed through extensive discussions between the Sri Lankan government and IMF staff. But in Sri Lanka's case, cooperation from China as the island's largest bilateral creditor will be required towards restructuring or reprofiling of public debt. In a statement emailed to Reuters news agency, IMF Sri Lanka Mission Chief Masahiro Nozaki said that IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva discussed lending options and policy plans with the Sri Lankan delegation on Tuesday.
IMF Sri Lanka Mission Chief Masahiro Nozaki has said in his email to Reuters that an IMF-supported program should be designed to resolve Sri Lanka's acute balance of payments problem and put the economy back on a sustainable growth path as early as possible. Reuters reports the statement came after protests yesterday in response to shortages of fuel and other essentials turned deadly, and Sri Lanka's finance minister formally asked the fund for a rapid financing instrument loan for countries needing urgent balance of payment support. Nozaki said the IMF is concerned about the current economic crisis in Sri Lanka and hardships suffered by the people, especially the poor and vulnerable. But he noted that the IMF staff had determined last month in an annual economic review that Sri Lanka's public debt was unsustainable and the country needs to take steps to restore debt sustainability prior to any IMF lending, including the Emergency Rapid Financing Instrument. Such restoration of debt sustainability typically requires a restructuring or reprofiling of public debt, which in Sri Lanka's case would require cooperation from China, one of its largest bilateral creditors. The IMF used the low conditionality RFI loans extensively to assist countries during the COVID-19 pandemic and has provided such loans to ease balance of payments problems after natural disasters, conflicts and commodity price shocks. IMF Sri Lanka Mission Chief said these conditions would need to be examined for a potential RFI for Sri Lanka once adequate assurances are obtained that debt sustainability will be resolved. He added that the specific design for a Sri Lanka IMF loan, including program targets and conditionality, would be agreed through extensive discussions between the government and IMF staff. Nozaki has also said that the IMF discussions are still at an early stage. Sri Lanka's delegation led by Finance Minister Ali Sabri met the IMF team, headed by Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva, met in Washington DC yesterday to discuss lending options. Sri Lanka's Finance Minister said in a statement yesterday that the IMF, while commending the steps already taken to mitigate the financial crisis, the global lender has assured their fuller support to Sri Lanka and a positive response to expedite the process to strengthen the support extended towards Sri Lanka.
Now, the World Bank said it is ready to provide emergency support to Sri Lanka and protect the vulnerable people amidst an unprecedented economic crisis in the country. Yesterday, the World Bank Vice President for South Asia region, Hartwig Schäfer, held talks with Finance Minister, President's Counsel Ali Sabri and Central Bank Governor Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe in Washington, D.C. on the sidelines of the annual spring meetings of the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank. Discussions focused on the actions to address the economic crisis, support stabilization and recovery, and protect the vulnerable people in Sri Lanka. Further, Hartwig Schäfer said that World Bank is deeply concerned about the impact of the crisis on the poor and vulnerable and stand ready to provide emergency support for essential medicines and health-related supplies, nutrition and education to Sri Lanka. Taking you back to Parliament, parliamentarian Anurupriya Darshana Yapa alleged today that former Central Bank Governor Ajit Niwad Cabral made the sole decision to float the rupee, leading to the current crisis. But former Central Bank Governor Ajit Niwad Cabral denied these claims made against him and said he did not take the arbitrary decision to float the exchange rate, but it was a decision made by the Monetary Board of the Central Bank.
පසුගිය දවසක අපි මුදල් පිළිබඳ මහා බැංකුව සහ මුදල් මණ්ඩලය අපි කැඳෙව්වා. ඒ කැඳවීමේදී අපි ප්‍රශ්න කෙරුවා මේ රුපියල පා කිරීම කොයි විදිහටද උනේ කියලා. මම මේ පිළිබඳව ඒ ඇති වුණු වර්බටිම් එක මම කියවන්න කැමති ඉංග්‍රීසියෙන් සංජීව ජයවර්ධන මහතා මෙන්න මෙහෙම කියලා තියෙනවා. මූල්‍ය මණ්ඩල සමාජික නීතිඥ සංජීව ජයවර්ධන decision on the 7th March honorable chairman and members was very clear. It is in this black and white that it is fixed at 230 rupees. Because we were very conscious of the dangers of a free float overnight. So originally, even the day before, that was on the 3rd of March, there was a discussion on as to whether it should go up to 215 and there will have to be reviewed. So the decision is that the bankers have shown some imperatives. Anyway, the Monetary Board decision is for 230. Ajit Niwad Cabral, Governor, says considering the severity of external shocks and the recent developments in the domestic front, Monetary Board of the Central Bank announced to comparative policy package. In that context, greater flexibility in the exchange rate will be allowed to the markets with immediate effect. මේ පුද්ගලයා තමයි මේක සම්පූර්ණයෙන්ම ෆ්ලෝට් කෙරුවේ. මේක දැනගෙන හිටියේ නෑ මුදල් ඇමතිවරයා. මේක දැනගෙන හිටියේ නෑ කැබිනට් මණ්ඩලය. අද කිසිම දෙයකට මිලක් නියම කරන්න බැරි වෙලා තියෙන්නේ මේ අඩු ගානේ IMF එකේ අදහස් වලට විරුද්ධව තනි පුද්ගලයෙක් ගත්ත තනි ඒකාධිපති හිතුවක්කාර තීන්දුවක් නිසා. ඒ නිසා මේ වගකීම රජය බාර ගන්න ඕනේ.
However, issuing a statement, former Central Bank Governor Ajit Niwad Cabral refuted claims of an arbitrary decision to float the rupee. Referring to the statement with regard to the rupee flexibility issued on the 7th of March, he said that it's the Monetary Board who decided to allow the market to have a greater flexibility in the exchange rate, and the forex transactions would take place at levels which are not more than 230 rupees per US dollar. In a backdrop where Sri Lankan government is negotiating a loan program with the IMF, parliamentarian of Ilanke Tamil Arsukachi M.A. Sumantiran requested IMF to impose conditions when funds are disbursed via rapid financing facility.
Now this debt sustainability is a huge issue because you have not rescheduled the debts. That should have happened quite some time ago before those became due. Now you've gone for an IMF program and there is no debt sustainability. So for IMF to assist you, you have to not only political stability but also debt sustainability. Now if these two are not done, there is no remedy. We know even with an IMF facility, even with a program that is successful, it's going to get worse for a while. But now there is no assurance that it's going to be successful the way it's going. I want to make another appeal to the International Monetary Fund.
Given that the rulers who have robbed this country are still in the saddle, they're refusing to go, despite the people in an unprecedented way in this country demonstrating and staying and requiring them to go. They are stubbornly refusing to go. Given that fact, that when IMF considers the rapid finance instrument, now that's the first thing that will be given. When they consider the rapid finance instrument, that they must make it conditional. A very strict condition must be imposed that this money that is given must go directly to the people, directly to the poor, for medicine, for basic food, for poor welfare.
In international markets, oil prices rebounded from sharp losses in the previous session as concerns about tighter supplies from Russia and Libya dominated, while industry data showed a drop in US crude inventories last week. Both benchmarks fell 5.2% in volatile trading yesterday after the International Monetary Fund slashed its forecast for global growth by nearly a full percentage point, citing the economic impacts of Russia's war in Ukraine and warning that inflation was now a clear and present danger for many countries.
Brent crude, which is the global benchmark, rose 66 cents or 0.6% to $107.91 a barrel, while the front-month US West Texas Intermediate crude futures contract, which expires today, rose 46 cents or 0.5% to $103.02 a barrel. The second-month contract gained 64 cents to $102.69 a barrel. Yesterday, both benchmarks fell, with Brent crude falling $5.91 to settle at $107.25 a barrel, while US West Texas Intermediate dropped $5.65 to settle at $102.56 a barrel. In its latest World Economic Outlook, IMF said the war is expected to further increase inflation, warning that a further tightening of Western sanctions on Russia to target energy exports would cause another major drop in global output. Downgrading its forecast for the second time this year, the global crisis lender said it now projects global growth of 3.6% in both 2022 and 2023, a drop of 0.8 and 0.2 percentage points respectively from its January forecast. Analysts believe that the sell-off yesterday on the back of IMF revisions was overdone and that the risks are still skewed by the upside, with potential for further disruptions from Libya, but more importantly, the potential for an EU ban on Russian oil. Global oil prices have been volatile, pulled higher by a tighter supply outlook following sanctions on Russia, the world's second-largest oil exporter and a key European supplier after its invasion on Ukraine. Economists say that's still a huge bout of uncertainty as to where the oil market is headed next, and oil looks like it may continue trading in a broad range in the near term. On the supply side, the organization and the petroleum exporting companies and its allies, known as OPEC Plus, produced 1.45 million barrels per day, below its production targets in March as Russian output began to decline following sanctions imposed by the West. OPEC Plus, which groups OPEC and allies led by Russia, agreed last month to a monthly oil output boost of 432,000 barrels per day for May, resisting pressure by major consumers to pump more. Russia produced about 300,000 barrels per day below its target in March at 10 million barrels. In the United States, crude stocks fell 4.5 million barrels last week, according to market sources citing American Petroleum Institute figures, against expectations of an increase in inventories. The bearish outlook added to price pressure from the dollar trading at a two-year high. Chicago's Federal Reserve Bank President Charles Evans on Tuesday said the Fed could raise its policy target range to 2.5% by year-end, but if inflation remains high, will likely need to hike rates further. Meanwhile, St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank President James Bullard said the US inflation is far too high, as he repeated his case for increasing interest rates to 3.5% by the end of the year to slow down what is now a 40-year high inflation readings.
That wraps up tonight's edition of AdaDerana English News. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.